In a solemn courtroom, the air holds its breath. Rows of uniforms line the benches. The same insignias that once symbolized safety now glint beneath the fluorescent lights like reminders of betrayal. At the front, the presiding judge, composed, deliberate, unshaken, surveys the room. Behind her calm expression lies a past they thought she'd never outrun. The faces before her once laughed as she stood powerless, accused, and silenced. Today they lower their eyes in shame. When the gavel descends, it carries not vengeance, but justice, slow, unrelenting, and absolute. The sound echoes through a system that once refused to hear her. Before she was Your Honor, she was Amara Lewis, a first-year public defender in a city that never seemed to sleep or to change. She carried a quiet fire, believing the law was more than words on paper, that justice could be something tangible, something human. The system, however, had its own hierarchy, one written in unwritten rules. The young, the idealistic, the outspoken, they were often reminded of their place. And for Amara, that reminder came one night too soon. A mistaken identity, a chaotic raid, an accusation that defied logic. She was arrested on her way home, wearing the same suit she'd defended a client in hours earlier. She thought it would be sorted out quickly, a misunderstanding corrected with a few phone calls. But the hours dragged into a night of silence, of indifference, of systemic rot. What hurt most wasn't the mistake. It was the laughter, the casual cruelty, the way the badge, meant to protect, became a weapon of humiliation. When they finally realized who she was, the apologies were thin, rehearsed, bureaucratic. The incident report was rewritten. The cameras conveniently failed. Amara tried to move on, bury herself in work, and build cases for others who had no voice. But something inside her had shifted. A quiet vow formed in that silence. That power misused would one day face itself in her reflection. Years passed. The world moved, but memories didn't. Amara's name began to circulate, a young attorney with impossible cases and improbable victories. She carried herself with poise, her calm mistaken for detachment, her silence for submission. But behind every word was precision. Behind every pause, intent. She rose through the ranks, prosecutor, district counsel, advisor, until her nomination for a judgeship was announced. Some called it political correctness. Others called it overdue justice. Amara didn't care for either. She saw it as a duty. When she first entered the judicial chamber, her reflection in the black robe seemed foreign. The robe carried weight, centuries of it. But beneath its fabric stood a woman who had once been stripped of dignity and agency. The contrast was not lost on her. Then, one ordinary morning, a docket landed on her desk. The case file was thick, but one line froze her pulse. Internal Affairs versus Officer H. Sanderson et al., names she hadn't spoken in years. Names she remembered not from paperwork, but from memory. The tone of a voice, the echo of laughter, the silence that followed. The irony was cruel, almost poetic. The officers were being investigated for misconduct, falsified arrests, and abuse of authority. Patterns eerily familiar to what she had endured. Amara reviewed the evidence methodically, clinically, but her mind wandered to that night, to every face, every smirk, every whispered joke. Yet what surprised her wasn't anger. It was clarity. She realized how the system had failed, not just her, but everyone who came after her. The trial began quietly, without spectacle. The defendants entered the courtroom like veterans of arrogance, still believing the system would shield them. But this time, the ground beneath them had shifted. Every argument they made echoed the exact phrases once used against her: protocol, procedure, standard practice. For the first time, those words sounded hollow to them, too. The public watched as testimonies unfolded, as evidence surfaced. The courtroom became a mirror, reflecting decades of unchecked authority. And at its center stood a woman who had once been reduced to silence, now commanding the room without raising her voice. The verdict day arrived with the same tension as a storm waiting to break. Outside, reporters speculated, cameras swarmed, but inside, the room was heavy with consequence. Amara sat poised, expression unreadable, her gavel resting beside her hand. The defendants, former officers, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gone were the smirks, the lazy confidence. In their place, unease. The prosecution detailed a pattern of misconduct spanning years, connecting cases through body cam footage, witness reports, and internal documents once buried under red tape. What began as one woman's humiliation had unveiled an entire system's decay, and now that system was being forced to confront itself. Amara's heart pounded steadily, not from fear, but from the weight of what justice truly meant. Retribution was too small a word for what stood before her. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration, truth, and the courage to face what power hides behind procedure. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of experience, not emotion. Every word was deliberate, every sentence a bridge between the person she was and the judge she had become. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was reckoning. The room seemed suspended in time. The same officers who once dismissed her were now measured by the very standards they had ignored. For Amara, the moment wasn't triumph. It was completion. The circle had closed. In the months that followed, Amara became a quiet symbol, not of revenge, but of resilience. She never spoke publicly about the case. She didn't need to. The story had already spoken for itself. Policy reforms began to emerge, slow but steady. Training programs have changed. Oversight committees strengthened. The conversation shifted, not because one woman had demanded it, but because her silence had exposed it. Late one evening, long after the courthouse emptied, Amara sat alone in her chambers. She looked at her reflection, the same calm eyes, but a softer gaze. The scars of that night still existed, but they no longer defined her. They reminded her that dignity isn't something others can give or take. It's something that endures. Outside her window, city lights flickered, 1,000 stories unfolding at once, each one fighting its own battle for justice, visibility, and truth. As she turned off the lamp, a question lingered, not one of bitterness, but of purpose. How many voices remain unheard because they were taught silence was safer than truth? The gavel rested quietly on her desk, no longer a symbol of judgment, but of balance, the kind that comes not from power, but from understanding. And in that quiet, the same quiet that once defined her pain, Amara Lewis found peace, not in what she overcame, but in who she became.